A while back here, I had Claude build me a perfect time blocked calendar. 5 minute conversation the night before, color coded, every hour accounted for. This was the thing that I've been trying to understand and build for years, but it was done for me in the time that it took me to drink a beer. So the next morning, I sat down with my coffee, and the first time block started. And about 6 minutes in, I ended up on Amazon looking at a desk lamp, I think it was. And at that point, I'm like, oh no, I'm just not enough. Great. And look, if you have ADHD and you've tried time blocking, you already know that, the feeling, you probably had it dozens of times. So I'm going to tell you why this specific system breaks against this specific brain, right? And I'm just going to tell you why this probably isn't your fault, and it probably never was. So here's why I kept coming back to it. I'm a freelancer, and on any given day, I have around 8 hours of stuff sitting in front of me to do, right? I work 8 hours a day. That's just like the standard, 8 hours is pretty normal, right? But the actual work part, the part where I'm doing the thing, it's more like 3-4 hours tops. And the rest is just kind of friction. It's switching tasks, opening tabs, half checking my messages, just drifting around in endless distractions and shiny things, I guess. Time blocking promised to compress all of that, get the work done in the morning, free up the afternoon, get back to my life. That's the dream that every freelancer recognizes. Time blocking sold that dream directly to me. So when Claude built this calendar, I was like, all right, finally, I am there. The setup was effortless. I didn't even have to do it. 5 minutes of conversation. It was like, hey, what are you going to do tomorrow? Tell me what you're going to do tomorrow. I'm like, here's what I'm going to do tomorrow. And then the calendar's good. Google Calendar did it. It just ended up on my calendar like it was like magic, which meant when I failed the next morning, the failure really had nowhere to hide. The system wasn't the problem. Of course, the system's never the problem. The system is perfect. I was the problem, or so I thought, for a really long time. And this is the first thing I figured out. The first hour of my day is not execute mode. It is scan mode, I wake up, I sit down at the computer, my brain wants to look around, it wants to, I'll email, do some messages, a thing that I forgot to research yesterday, an idea for a project, whatever the impulse is or the impulse backlog from the day before is, that's the first hour. And time blocking demands that I execute from the moment that I sit down. So that first block of the day, it was always going to break. It was doomed as soon as it started, and the architecture was wrong from minute one. So now here's the part that kept me trapped for years. Sometimes time blocking did work. It would work for 3 days, sometimes 4 days. I would ride this compressed productive momentum, and I would think that the breakthrough had finally arrived in my life, but it would always wear off. Let me give you the math on this. And look, before I say this up front, I'm just going to say this is not a flex. This is just math. I deliver 80 video projects a month on the high end, usually, right? So I work 5 days a week. That's 4 projects a day gets you 80 because I work about 20 days per month at that math. Most days, I'll do somewhere between 1 and 4 video projects, sometimes none, sometimes more, right? It's never really even, but every once in a while, I would have one of those days. I would wake up and I would be just sick of being behind and feeling unproductive, and I would just be ready to go. I would say, that's not me. Today, this is me. And I'd have that day and I'd close out 10 projects. But you know what that 10 project in one day thing did or does to my brain? It tells me in that moment that my problems are over, because if I could do 10 a day, I would only have to work 8 days a month. I would be done by the second week. The other 22 days would be mine. Passion projects, golf, whatever I wanted to do with my afternoons. This is the dream, not just the freelancer dream, but my dream specifically, right? Total freedom built around the math of that one really good 10 project day that I had. You know, I had a psychiatrist talk to me about this too. I mean, I'd walk through the numbers with him like we were solving some sort of puzzle. You know, if I could just be responsible for each block this whole life, then I imagined it was sitting right there. You know, it took me a long time to understand what was actually happening on those good days. The dopamine hit didn't come from like doing the work. It came from imagining the future productive version of me. So the fantasy was the reward. So once my brain cashed that in, it set up, there was nothing left waiting for the execution. It's gone, right? Following through felt like working for free. So time blocking wasn't the thing that worked those few good days. Novelty was actually the thing that worked. Every productivity system that I'd ever tried gave me 3 or 4 days of momentum. Because here's the thing, the novelty itself was the fuel. So when the novelty faded, the system went with it. And then I would just find the next shiny one. And you know, years can disappear inside that loop. And by the way, that perfectly compressed work week with the free afternoons, yeah, it never happened. Not once. That's part of what makes this whole thing so frustrating. You know, you factor in everybody telling you to try harder while this whole thing's happening. You know, I had a therapist prescribe me the very systems that were failing me. People close to me would get confused about why I couldn't just stick with it or try harder. You know, eventually you start saying it to yourself. You're like, hey, try harder. Even though harder was already the only setting that I had, right? When I was in college and there were tests where I'd study more than the people sitting next to me and I'd get like a 40%, they'd get an A. And they would be like, hey man, just like, why don't you study? I'd studied more than them. Try harder wasn't bad advice. It was just the loudest voice in the room for a lot of decades. And the prize at the end of the productivity tunnel for me was never about being more productive. It was about being happy. And it was about earning back the afternoons. It was about closing the gap between the life I was living and the life that I thought I was supposed to be living. And for a moment, time blocking promised to deliver that. It just never did. I kept paying for a thing that I never got. And, you know, before I tell you what I do now, I want to say one thing. I know I'm in a privileged position. I'm a freelancer. I can have an unproductive morning. I can sleep in. And the consequence is that I just work a little bit later in the day. It's not that I get fired or anything, because most people don't have that option. They show up at 9 a.m. or else they lose their job. So this isn't a prescription at all. This is just a confession. And here's what I do now, which is not at all perfect. I just have a notepad. So I'll literally just like, I don't know if you can see this, but it's just tasks with check marks that I have to finish, and I check them off. That's it. Pen, paper, as I go. That's the system. I work in pressure-driven blocks in this sense, you know, not time-driven blocks. And some days I knock through like 5 projects in 3 hours and I'm done by lunch. And then some days I just accept that nothing's going to happen and I go build something useless and whatever, you know. The check marks the dopamine on this, though, is why I love it. But the acceptance is the practice. So for most of my life, my mantra was try harder. And then that slowly became, I guess I just got to try differently. And I guess that's the only thing I can tell you with any confidence is forgiveness is the thing that I need most. But forgiveness alone is not enough either. I still have to keep searching because I'm not an expert. I'm not a guru. Every now and then I notice a way to try differently. That's about it. So yeah, let me know your thoughts.